Hello, fellow rebel capitalists. Hope you're well. We've got some more breaking news that is ironic, to say the least. And I've tried to avoid this topic, but this headline was just too much. There's no way I could avoid talking about this, no matter how dangerous talking about this actually is. You guys will see what I'm referring to in just a moment here. Let's go to this article from CNBC and the unmentionable. It, it's like Harry Potter. Who was that? I wish Josh was here. He'd tell me. Josh, chime in here. Who is that? Voldemort or something? Wasn't that like the name you couldn't mention or something? That's pretty much what we're dealing with now with this individual on the screen. Most of you know who I'm referring to. We'll call this individual Voldemort for future reference. So Voldemort saying that whatever this group that you can read right here, I'll go ahead and highlight this group. Whatever they do is good. Because you could imagine, and if you haven't been following the news, this group came out and said that the amount of time that you have to kind of sit on the sidelines for specific reasons is reduced. I think they took it from 10 days down to 5 days for certain groups in the population. And you can imagine that if this would have been someone in the public or in the private sector, saying this, or some business, or maybe an airline CEO might have suggested this. And you can imagine what Voldemort would have done. He said, "Oh, no, that's a terrible, terrible idea. What are you talking about? We can't do that. That's going to create insert fear-mongering." I'm doing the best I can here, guys. But you could see that if this was an entity in the private sector, that they would be condemned. They would say, "Oh, no, you're putting grandma at risk. You're putting society at risk. You can't do that." But when it's, let's just say, an institution that Voldemort likes, then all of a sudden, no matter what they do, then they're doing the right thing. And I've been saying this for so long, guys, that when these restrictions, we'll call them, first started coming out, they didn't make any sense. And I continued to see red flag after red flag after red flag. And then when they completely ignore having had the cerveza sickness in the past, then I knew right then and there definitively, okay, something's up here. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is not tinfoil hatter stuff. They're intentionally pushing a narrative here. This is blatantly obvious. But when you see stuff like this, and you know darn well that Voldemort would not, he would say the opposite. Like I said, if it were a CEO in the private sector, it's just more proof that what is coming out of their mouth cannot be trusted at all. There's an objective here. There's a narrative, and this makes it even more obvious than it was before. But this isn't the amazing part of this article. And I'm going to skip over most of it here for obvious reasons. But you guys can, if you look at the URL, I'll go ahead and actually, you know what I can do is, this is probably a good way around it here. I'll just go ahead and put this in the chat, and then you guys can reference this when I get done with the live stream on your own. Hopefully that will work. Let's see. Does that work? Yes. Cool. So now you've got the link in the chat, and you can go ahead and click on that when we get done. But going back to the article here, I want to show you guys what I highlighted. So this article goes on and on and on, and how Voldemort says that we got to get people back to work, is what he basically tells this reporter. He says, well, obviously, if you're in this condition, then you shouldn't, but we've got to figure out a way to get those with, and I'm reading this right at the page, those with essential jobs to keep our society running smoothly. We've got to figure out a way to get these people back to work, even if they do have the cerveza sickness. And then this article goes on to state, for instance, many hospitals are facing or fear they may face staff shortages. Weird. I mean, wasn't it Voldemort and all of his central planning and authoritarian cronies who said, listen, if you don't do what we want you to do, well, then you need to be fired? No exceptions. Had the cerveza sickness in the past? Doesn't matter. Fired. So I just went and did a quick Google search, and you guys can see what I looked up. You guys can do the same thing, easy, and just hit news, and you see, and I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know, because you guys have been following this in the news, but we see entity, and you guys see the entities I'm referring to, hospitals. You see entity after entity after entity after entity with these news stories saying they fired 216 employees. They fired this employee, 27 years of service, it looks like. They fired 7 workers here. They fired dozens of employees here. And we're talking specifically about employees who worked in healthcare. So they fire all of these great employees, and then they sit there and scratch their head and say, boy, this is, I don't know what we can do. Well, we got to reduce the time that people take to, let's say, recover. We've got to reduce that time because we have these staff shortages, and we got to get people back to work. So look at what they're doing. So they're sitting there firing all these great employees because supposedly those employees are too much of a risk to other people. That's the argument. But in doing so, they're taking people that are definitely risking others because of the fact that they have the cerveza sickness, for heaven's sakes. And they're trying to figure out, how can we get these people that are definitely a risk back to the job more quickly? See, this is government. This is central planning. So for any of you watching this video right now, or maybe you've got friend and family member Freds, or your typical CNN viewer who is in favor of central planning, who wants bigger government, who wants a more authoritarian approach to everything, just show them this story and say, this is what I'm talking about. This is why central planning is bad. This is why we have to decentralize things. This is why we need to put the emphasis on the individual, not the emphasis on the collective group. Because if we continue to allow these central planners to do the things they're doing, you are going to have unintended consequence after unintended consequence after unintended consequence. And like 99% of what they do, regardless of their intention, the actual result of the policy makes things far, far worse. And that's why I always conclude every video by saying we've got to stand up for liberty, freedom, meaning putting the emphasis back on the individual. And we need free market capitalism. Because free market, not just capitalism, but free market capitalism is the only way to solve a shortage of anything, regardless of whether it's goods, services, or labor. Guys, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Like I said, always stand up for freedom, liberty, free market capitalism. We'll see you in the next video.